Sophie hadn't sleepwalked since she was 10 years old. That's what she told herself every night before bed, like a ritual, a quiet reassurance that her body and mind finally belonged to her. The last time it happened, she'd woken up barefoot in the backyard, her fingers bleeding from gripping the fence, her mother screaming her name under the orange porch light. That was 15 years ago. She was 25 now, living alone in a rented house on Maple Street, working remote nights for a design firm, sleeping strange hours but sleeping well. At least until last week. It started small noises in the hallway, faint knocks against the wall she couldn't place. She blamed the wind, or the neighbors, or maybe the old pipes that groaned every time the temperature dropped. But then her phone alarm started going off at odd hours. 2:47 a.m., 3:12, 4:03, always in threes, always before dawn. She'd wake up sweating, heart pounding, feeling like she'd been running though she hadn't left the bed. On Tuesday, she found dirt on her feet, just a smear across the left heel, dry but unmistakable. She laughed it off, told herself maybe she'd stepped outside to take the trash out half asleep. But the trash bins were untouched. Her slippers were clean. Her doormat wasn't. By Friday, she'd started locking her bedroom door from the inside. She even pushed a chair under the knob, the way you see in movies when people are hiding from something. But that night, she woke up standing not in bed, not even in her room, but at the bottom of the staircase, one hand resting on the railing. The chair was still wedged under the doorknob upstairs. Her first thought wasn't fear. It was confusion, the disorienting, heavy kind that makes you question gravity. Her body felt wrong, like her skin didn't quite fit. Her fingers trembled, her breath came in short bursts, and her pulse thudded behind her eyes. She whispered to the empty hallway, "What the hell is happening to me?" No answer. Only the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. The next morning, she installed a motion camera in her bedroom. Not a fancy one, just a $30 one she found online, the kind people use to monitor pets. She angled it toward her bed, tested it, watched the red light blink to life. Then she forced herself to sleep before midnight. The footage the next day made her stomach drop. At 2:43 a.m. she sat upright. Not a twitch, a full sharp movement like someone had yanked her spine upright with invisible string. Her eyes opened. Her head turned toward the door. She stayed that way for 5 full minutes. Then she stood up, walked to the window, opened it, climbed out. At 3:09 a.m., the camera caught her shadow returning through the same window. But this time, the body moved slower, stiffer, like the joints had forgotten how to bend. And when she came fully into frame, her eyes weren't open anymore, they were closed. Sophie stared at the paused frame on her laptop screen for nearly an hour. Then she deleted the footage. Not because she wanted to forget, but because she couldn't handle seeing what came next. The following night, she did something she hadn't done since she was a child. She tied a bell string from her wrist to the bedpost. It was an old trick her mother had used. If she got up, the bell would wake her. At 2:58 a.m., the bell rang. Not softly, not the way a gentle tug would make it ring. It clanged violently, repeatedly, like someone was pulling it on purpose. She woke up gasping. The string was broken. The window was open. The curtains swayed against the night air, moonlight flickering across the walls like water. She got out of bed, her bare feet cold against the floorboards. "Hello?" she whispered into the hallway. Silence. Then faintly, from somewhere deeper in the house came a sound that didn't belong, not creaking, not wind, breathing, slow, deep, coming from the direction of the kitchen. Her throat went dry. She took one cautious step forward, then another. The sound stopped. When she reached the kitchen, everything looked normal until she saw the door to the basement slightly open. She was sure she'd locked it. The light from the hallway barely reached the steps. The darkness below looked thick, like it had weight. Her phone camera shook in her hand as she turned on the flashlight and whispered again, "Is someone there?" The light caught movement not at the bottom of the stairs, but halfway up. Bare feet, her own. Sophie froze at the top of the stairs. Her breath caught in her chest, her flashlight shaking in her hand. The beam trembled over the wooden steps, catching flakes of paint peeling from the railing. For a second, she couldn't move. The air that rose from the basement was colder than outside, air-heavy, wet, almost salty. It smelled faintly of soil and something else she couldn't name. Something metallic. She swallowed hard. "Hello?" Her voice sounded too loud. The walls seemed to swallow it, bending it until it came back quieter, like an echo spoken by someone else. Nothing moved. But those footprints were still there, bare, small and unmistakably hers. They led halfway down the stairs before vanishing into the darkness. She hesitated, the rational part of her brain screaming to call someone, anyone. But who would she tell? That she followed her own footprints into her basement at 3 in the morning. Her hand tightened on the phone. The flashlight flickered once, dimmed, then steadied again. She took a step. The old wood groaned beneath her foot. Another step. The sound echoed in Pearson Creek for her, one fainter, delayed. She froze again. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She turned the flashlight toward the sound. A shape shifted behind the water heater tall, still blending into the dark. She raised the phone higher, trying to focus. Who's there? The shape didn't move. It just stood there, shoulders slightly tilted, head at an unnatural angle. The light hit its face. For one heart-stopping second, she saw herself. Her own face, eyes closed, mouth slightly open, breathing slow and steady, like sleep. But the skin was too pale, the expression too calm. The flashlight shook harder. What is this? She whispered. The other Sophie didn't react. Her hands hung limply by her sides, her hair draped forward like she'd just climbed out of water. Sophie took a step closer. The air grew colder, heavy enough to feel against her skin. Her twin figure swayed slightly, like a puppet on invisible strings. Then its head turned. Not all the way, just a slow, twitching motion, enough for one eye to open. It wasn't white, it was black. The pupils spread outward like ink in water, swallowing what little light remained. A faint sound came from its throat like air being drawn in through dry leaves. Sophie stumbled backward, tripping over the last step and landing hard on the floor. Her phone slipped from her hand, clattering across the concrete. The beam spun wildly, flashing across boxes, pipes, and her own pale reflection in the basement window. When she looked back, the other figure was gone. She crawled forward, grabbing the phone with trembling fingers. No. No, no, no. The light darted across the room. Nothing, just shadows. But the smell lingered, the metallic scent, stronger now, almost choking. Something dripped nearby. She turned the light. The footprints were backers, wet and dark, leading deeper into the basement, toward the old storm door at the far end. The hinges were rusted, but the metal was slick and fresh. She followed them, heart racing so fast she could hear it in her teeth. It's not real, she whispered. It's just sleep. I'm dreaming. I'm not awake. The storm door rattled once, as if something on the other side had heard her. She stopped. Her knees went weak. Slowly, she lifted the flashlight toward the small rectangular window above the door. It was fogged, but behind the glass, movement. A pale hand pressed against the inside, but it wasn't reaching out. It was pulling in. Sophie screamed, stumbling backward into a shelf. Jars shattered, glass scattering across the floor. The hand disappeared. The door went still. The flashlight flickered again, stuttering in the dark. Her chest heaved as she gasped for breath. Wake up, she whispered, slapping her own cheek hard enough to sting. Wake up! But nothing changed. Her breathing slowed. The air felt thicker again, the temperature dropping another few degrees. The fog at the bottom of the stairs began to rise, crawling toward her feet. Then faintly she heard footsteps upstairs, slow, heavy, dragging footsteps. Someone or something was walking through her kitchen. She turned, heart slamming in her chest, and whispered, Who's there? No answer, just the faint creak of the floorboards above her head. Then the sound of the front door opening. She ran up the stairs 2 at a time, clutching her phone like a weapon. When she burst into the kitchen, the door stood wide open, the cold night spilling inside. The street was empty, the neighborhood silent. Only the doormat had changed. It was soaked, muddy, and on it, written in smudged brown streaks that might have been dirt or blood, were the words, You're still asleep. By sunrise, Sophie hadn't blinked in nearly an hour. She sat at her desk, staring at her laptop, the glow painting her face in cold light. The words on the doormat wouldn't leave her mind, You're still asleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw them again, the letters smeared and uneven, the kind that looked written by someone trembling. She had scrubbed the mat until her hands ached, but the stain hadn't faded. Now she hovered over the play button on her security footage. The motion camera from her bedroom had recorded all night. She hadn't wanted to look, but curiosity and fear are twins, and both had her by the throat. She clicked play. The timestamp read 2:41 a.m. The image was dark, grainy, but she could see herself sleeping soundly. The sheets rose and fell with every breath. 2 minutes passed. Then she sat up fast, too fast, like the string from her spine had been pulled again. Her eyes opened, only. They weren't glowing or blank or any of the horror movie things she half expected. They were just wrong. Her pupils lagged behind when her head moved, like her body and her gaze weren't connected. At 2:45, she stood, turned toward the door. Then the camera glitched. For a full 2 seconds, static covered the screen. When it cleared, she was gone. Sophie paused the footage, dragging the timeline forward. "Where did I go?" she whispered. At 3:02, motion triggered again. She climbed back into frame, but not through the door. Through the wall. The image distorted as if the pixels couldn't decide what to do. One moment her figure was there, the next it wasn't, like she was flickering in and out of existence. The only constant was her shadow. It stayed perfectly solid even when she didn't. She pressed pause again. The shadow on the floor was different. Taller, sharper, its head tilted in the opposite direction. Her throat went dry. No, that's not. She dragged the timeline backward frame by frame. In one frame, the shadow looked at the camera. Just the shadow, the body didn't move. The room around her felt smaller. Every sound amplified the hum of her laptop fan, the faint tick of her wall clock, her own heartbeat pounding behind her ribs. She hit play again. At 3:06, she saw herself or something shaped like her crawl onto the bed. The figure moved wrong, like its bones didn't bend the way human ones do. Then it lay down beside her sleeping body, and stayed there. The sheets barely moved, only the faint shimmer of the blanket rising and falling, 2 rhythms, not one. Sophie's fingers trembled as she hit pause again. Her reflection flickered on the laptop screen, pale, exhausted, afraid. She looked exactly like the version lying in bed on screen. Her chest tightened. That's not me. Then the image shifted on its own. The screen froze on the still frame of her lying there, eyes closed, mouth slightly open, but the reflection of her in the laptop glass started to move. Slowly. She blinked hard. The reflection didn't. She slammed the laptop shut and staggered back, nearly tripping over her chair. The sound echoed too loudly in the quiet house. The window curtains fluttered. The air grew colder. Then came the sound she had learned to fear more than any other, the faint bell ringing from her bedside, the one she'd tied to her wrist. It rang twice, then stopped. She turned toward the bedroom door, her pulse wild. The sound came again, softer this time, not from the bed, from the hallway outside. She grabbed a flashlight and crept forward. The bell sound echoed once more, and this time she saw movement, the faint swing of a small silver bell dangling from the air like invisible string. It was hers, the one she'd tied around her wrist. Only her wrist was still wearing it. The reflection of the bell, faint, blurry, hung in the air next to her own. 2 bells. Her voice broke. "Who's there?" The reflection moved first. She screamed and ran back to the laptop, flipping it open again, desperate to see something that made sense. The camera feed was still active, still recording. She could see herself on the screen standing in the middle of the room, flashlight shaking. Then, behind her, the image showed something rising from the bed. A figure, same clothes, same hair, same face. But when it turned toward the camera, its eyes were open and hers on the recording closed. For a few seconds, Sophie couldn't breathe. The image on her laptop showed her duplicate standing behind her, but when she spun around, the hallway was empty. The silence that followed wasn't normal silence, it had texture, like the air itself was listening. She pressed her palm to her chest, feeling her heart thudding so hard it hurt. "You're awake," she whispered to herself. "You're awake." But the room didn't feel awake. The air felt thick, slow, like it was underwater. Her reflection in the dark window by her bed didn't move right. It blinked half a second too late. She took a step closer. The reflection tilted its head, following her but not in sync. Its lips parted. For a moment, nothing happened. Then faintly she heard her own voice, not from her mouth, but from the glass itself. "You should be sleeping." She froze. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "You're not real." The reflection smiled, but it wasn't kind. "Neither are you." The glass cracked. A single jagged line split the reflection from forehead to chin, dividing her face into 2 uneven halves. She stumbled back, knocking over her lamp. The bulb burst, throwing the room into darkness except for the faint beam from her flashlight. The crack spread, branching across the glass like veins. From behind it, faint fingers pressed against the inside of the reflection pale, long, too many. The surface bulged outward, warping under invisible pressure. Sophie screamed, hurling the flashlight at the mirror. It shattered, shards scattering across the floor. The room went black. She stumbled toward the door, stepping on broken glass, cutting her foot. The pain felt sharp, too real. She didn't care. She had to get out. The hallway stretched ahead, darker than before, every shadow breathing like it had lungs. The sound came again. Bare footsteps, light, soft, matching hers perfectly. She froze mid-step. The air behind her shifted. Someone was there. She turned slowly. The light from the hallway flickered once, long enough to show the outline of a figure at the far end. It was her, standing barefoot, wearing the same shirt, the same torn pajama pants, the same bloodied foot. Her twin's head tilted slightly to the left, the same angle as the reflection's crack. Sophie's mouth went dry. "Stay away from me." The other one smiled faintly. I tried. Her voice was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that came after panic, like she had already accepted something Sophie hadn't. "Who are you?" Sophie demanded. The other tilted her head again. "You." "No," Sophie said, backing away. "You're sleeping," the duplicate finished softly. "And you need to come back." The light flickered again, and suddenly the duplicate was closer. Halfway down the hall now. The floorboards creaked beneath her bare feet. The air around her shimmered faintly, bending light like heat haze. Sophie's knees nearly buckled. "Stay back!" The duplicate stopped. "You left the bed open," she whispered. "Someone has to lie there." Sophie shook her head violently. "This isn't real. I'm dreaming." The other's voice hardened, cutting through her denial like a blade. "Then wake up." The hallway went dark. A hand clamped around Sophie's wrist, ice cold. She screamed, jerking away, but the grip tightened. The duplicate's face came into view, eyes open now, completely black, reflecting nothing. Her smile stretched too wide, skin splitting faintly at the corners. "You're walking in my world," the duplicate whispered. "And if you keep walking, I'll have to wake up in yours." Sophie fought to pull away, but her arm felt heavy, like it belonged to someone else. Her vision blurred, the walls melting into gray fog. The duplicate leaned closer until Sophie could smell her breath, damp, metallic, the scent of soil and sleep. Then, in a single breath, she whispered, "Go back to bed." Sophie was thrown backward, not pushed-pulled. The hallway stretched away from her, colors smearing like wet paint. Her body slammed into something soft. She gasped, eyes flying open. She was in bed. Her sheets were damp with sweat. Her phone buzzed faintly beside her 3:03 a.m. The bell string was still tied to her wrist. The flashlight lay on the floor. Everything looked normal. She sat up slowly, chest heaving. "It was a dream," she whispered. It was just a dream. Then she saw it. A bloody handprint on the inside of her bedroom door. Her hand. By Monday, Sophie was done pretending she could handle it alone. She hadn't slept a full night in 4 days. Her eyes ached. Her hands shook. And every time she closed her eyes, she saw that hallway, the cracked mirror, the other version of her whispering, "Go back to bed." She found the clinic online, the Evergreen Sleep Center, 3 towns over. The receptionist's voice had been calm, clinical, too calm for what Sophie tried to explain. "You're describing parasomnia," the woman said. "We can monitor your brain activity and body movement overnight. Many patients experience vivid episodes that feel real." Sophie wanted to believe her. She wanted a word like parasomnia to make sense of everything. That night, the clinic smelled like disinfectant and new paint. White walls, quiet halls. She filled out forms with trembling hands while the nurse attached electrodes to her temples and chest. The wires tugged gently every time she moved. "Don't worry," the nurse said, smiling. "The room is soundproof and we'll be monitoring from across the glass. Just relax. Try to sleep." Sophie lay on the bed, trying to match her breathing to the steady hum of the monitor. For a while, nothing happened. Just her own thoughts looping and looping. "You're safe. You're awake. This is real." Then, at some point, she drifted off. When she woke up, it was morning. The nurse was smiling again, clipboard in hand. "You did great," she said. "We'll review the recording and call you later this afternoon." Sophie thanked her, half dazed, and drove home. The sun looked too bright, the world too sharp. For once, she felt almost normal. Until the call came. It was the clinic manager. His voice was tight, confused. "Ms. Keller, we need to clarify something." Sophie's hand went cold around her phone. "What is it?" He hesitated. "Our system shows you checked in last night at 9:47 p.m., but when we reviewed the video feed, you never entered the building." Her stomach twisted. "What?" "The cameras show your car pulling into the lot, headlights off, but you never come inside. The night guard even walked out to check after you didn't show up at the desk. Your car was gone." Sophie's voice shook. "That's not possible." "I was there. I talked to the nurse." "Ms. Keller," the manager said carefully, "no nurse reported contact with you. And we have only one room recorded active last night. It was empty." She felt her legs weaken. "Check again, please. There has to be a mistake." "I'll send you the footage," he said quietly. "You can see for yourself." The email arrived 10 minutes later. Sophie sat at her desk, laptop glowing in the dim afternoon light. She clicked the attachment. The clinic's hallway appeared, sterile and silent. The timestamp read 9:48 p.m. She saw her car's headlights sweep past the outer window. Then nothing. No door opening. No footsteps. Just the hall camera flickering every few seconds. At 2:03 a.m., motion triggered. The monitor inside one of the observation rooms blinked on. The bed was empty. The sheets moved. Not like air, like something had just climbed in or out. The heart monitor spiked once, then went flat. Sophie's hands trembled as she fast-forwarded through the footage. At 2:46, the camera flickered again, and for half a second, her reflection appeared in the glass wall separating the observation room from the control booth. Her eyes were open, her head tilted, and behind her reflection, faintly visible in the same glass, was another her lying still on the bed, wires attached, breathing. Sophie's voice cracked. "No, no, no, no." She replayed the frame 3 times. Each time, the reflection stayed, but the body in the bed blurred more, like the video itself was forgetting which version to show. She slammed the laptop shut and stood up so fast the chair toppled. Her heart hammered in her ears. "It's not real," she whispered. "It's not!" Then her phone buzzed again. "Unknown number." She hesitated, then answered. A voice on the other end whispered softly, distorted by static, "You never left the bed, Sophie." The line went dead. The house around her went silent, utterly still, the kind of silence that feels like it's waiting. She looked toward her bedroom door. The bell on her nightstand trembled once, though there was no breeze. Then faintly, from the laptop she had just closed, came the sound of her own voice playing back, muffled but clear. "I tried. Someone has to lie there." Sophie didn't remember deciding to drive back to the clinic. 1 minute she was pacing her living room. The next her hands were gripping the steering wheel, headlights cutting through morning fog. The road felt longer than before, stretched thin like a bad dream you couldn't wake from. Every turn looked the same. Same gas station, same stretch of trees, the same half-frozen crow sitting on the guardrail. By the time she reached the Evergreen Sleep Center, the parking lot was nearly empty. The building looked different in daylight, smaller, duller, like it had lost its edges. She parked and stared through the windshield for a full minute, trying to remember exactly what the place had looked like last night. The blue sign out front said Evergreen Sleep Clinic, but half the letters were chipped. Had they been chipped yesterday? She walked inside. The front desk was empty. No nurse, no receptionist. The faint hum of machines echoed from somewhere deeper in the building. "Hello?" Her voice sounded hollow. "It's Sophie Keller. I was here last night. You recorded my session." No answer. Just the faint flicker of the fluorescent lights overhead. She stepped closer to the counter, glancing at the open logbook beside the keyboard. The pages were filled with neat rows of patient names and times. Her finger slid down the list until she found hers. Keller Sophie intake, 9:47 p.m., status, discharged, deceased. Her throat locked. No. She blinked, stepped back, rubbed her eyes, and looked again. The word didn't change. Deceased. She turned toward the hall. "Hello, is anyone here?" Footsteps echoed faintly, slow, dragging, from somewhere beyond the observation rooms. She followed the sound, heart pounding. The hallway lights buzzed overhead, flickering in rhythm with her breath. The observation windows were dark but faintly reflective. She saw herself in each one as she passed, small, pale, trembling. Then one reflection didn't match. The version of her in the glass didn't walk. It stood still, head tilted slightly. As she moved past, it turned to face her, following her without taking a step. She stumbled backward, hitting the wall. "Stop it," she whispered. "You're not real." The reflection smiled. "Neither are you." Her stomach dropped. She turned and ran, nearly slipping on the polished floor. She reached the last room at the end of the hall, the one she remembered from her test night. The door was slightly open. The light inside flickered faintly, strobing against the walls. She pushed it open. Inside, the bed was made. The wires coiled neatly. The monitors were off. But the smell, that antiseptic sting mixed with something older, something decayed, filled the room. She stepped closer to the glass partition separating the room from the observation booth. The lights on the other side flickered, revealing something on the wall. A photo, a small printed ID badge pinned under glass. Her own face, her name. Keller, Sophie technician, deceased 2018. Her breath hitched. She stumbled backward, knocking into the bed. The monitor beeped once, flickering to life. The screen showed a heartbeat, steady, slow. Then, faintly, the speakers crackled. A voice, her voice, whispered through the static. "You checked in years ago, Sophie. You never left." She turned, eyes wide. The reflection in the glass had changed. It wasn't her anymore. The figure wore the same hospital gown she remembered from last night, the same electrode wires trailing down its arms. Its eyes were closed. Its mouth moved silently, but the voice filled the room. "Go back to bed." She reached for the door, but it slammed shut. The lock clicked on its own. The lights went out. Only the monitor glow remained, bathing everything in cold blue. The reflection's eyes opened. Not black this time, pure white, glowing faintly, like light leaking through thin skin. The heartbeat on the monitor sped up, matching her panic. Then the line spiked once and flattened. The reflection smiled. The screen went black. And in that silence, Sophie heard it, faint but real, coming from behind her, from the empty bed she'd just touched. Breathing, slow, deep, familiar. She turned around. The bed wasn't empty anymore. Someone lay under the sheet. Her own voice whispered again, right next to her ear this time. "Someone has to lie there." By the time Sophie reached home, the sun was already setting, though it felt like she'd left the clinic only minutes ago. The sky was an ugly bruise of orange and gray, and every house she passed looked slightly wrong, curtains drawn too tight, windows reflecting nothing. Her own house was no different. The porch light was on, even though she never left it that way. She stood outside for a long time, just staring at the door. Part of her wanted to leave, to drive until the world made sense again. But her hands moved on their own, unlocking the door, pushing it open. The house smelled faintly of rain. The floor creaked beneath her shoes. Everything looked normal, too normal. Her keys sat in the dish by the door, her jacket hung neatly on the hook. The cup she'd left on the counter that morning was gone. She whispered, "Hello?" Silence. Then the faint sound of running water came from upstairs. The bathroom. Her chest tightened. She moved up the stairs slowly, each step groaning beneath her weight. The sound grew louder, the steady rush of the shower. She reached the door and paused. Steam curled out from under it. Her hand shook as she gripped the doorknob. "Please," she whispered, voice cracking. "Please don't be me." She opened the door. The mirror above the sink was fogged over. The shower curtain was drawn. The sound of water echoed softly in the tiled room. She reached out and swiped the mirror clean with her sleeve. Her reflection stared back, but it didn't match. Its lips moved, though hers didn't. "You shouldn't have gone back," it whispered. Sophie stumbled backwards, slamming into the wall. The curtain shifted. Someone moved behind it. Her shaking hand reached forward and yanked it open. Empty. The water stopped. She turned toward the mirror again and saw herself still standing there, still staring, still whispering words she couldn't hear. Then the reflection smiled, slowly raising its hand in a motion she hadn't made. Behind her, the bathroom door closed on its own. The light flickered once. Then all the mirrors in the house bedroom, hallway, even the small decorative one by the stairs began to hum faintly. Not loud, but enough that she could feel it in her bones. She ran downstairs, tripping over the last step. Her phone buzzed on the counter. When she grabbed it, the screen showed her home camera feed, the one pointed at her bedroom. The timestamp read 3:03 a.m. Her bed was empty. Then the door opened. A figure entered barefoot, slow, calm. The face was hers, but the eyes were open. It climbed into bed, pulled the covers over itself, and lay perfectly still. The feed froze. Her reflection in the phone screen didn't match. It was smiling. She threw the phone across the room. It hit the wall and shattered, but the faint light from the cracked screen still glowed. In that broken reflection, her smile still moved. Her breathing came fast and shallow. "No," she whispered. "You're not me. You're not." From the shadows near the kitchen doorway came a faint reply, her own voice. "Then who are you?" She spun around. The outline of a woman stood there, barely visible in the dim light. She took a step forward and Sophie took a step back. Every movement mirrored perfectly, like they were dancing. The woman the other her tilted her head. "You left the bed empty," she said softly. "You left the door open. Someone had to walk." Sophie's knees weakened. "Why me?" The duplicate smiled faintly. "Because you never stopped dreaming." The lights flickered again. When they steadied, the other Sophie was gone. She stood alone in the living room, trembling, trying to steady her breath. Then she noticed something strange. The shadows on the wall didn't match. Her own shadow stood still, but the one beside it moved. Slowly, deliberately, it turned its head toward her. Sophie backed away, heart hammering. The air grew heavy again, pressing against her skin. The windows started fogging up from the inside. In the faint mist on the glass, words began to form, drawn by an invisible hand. "Stay in bed." The shadow on the wall smiled. And for the first time, Sophie realized something she hadn't before the house wasn't haunted. It was waiting. Waiting for her to lie down again. That night, Sophie didn't try to sleep. She sat in the living room with all the lights on, watching the front door, the mirrors, her own trembling hands. She told herself she wouldn't blink, wouldn't give the house a chance to move again. But even with every light burning, shadows found places to hide. They stretched under the furniture, curled behind the curtains, moved whenever she looked away. At 2:53 a.m. the power went out. The lights died in one collective sigh, plunging the house into deep blue darkness. Sophie sat frozen in the glow of her phone screen, her reflection trembling faintly in the glass. The battery read 3%. "Not again," she whispered. "Please." Then faintly from upstairs came the creak of her bedroom floorboards. Slow, rhythmic, like footsteps pacing. She stood, every instinct screaming to run, but where? Every place she'd gone, her shadow followed. Every attempt to escape had led her back home. The only way out now was through. Her feet moved before her mind did. One step, then another. The stairs groaned under her weight, the sound echoing in the silent house. At the top of the stairs, the hallway looked different longer, like the house had stretched itself in the dark. The air was colder, the moonlight dimmer. Her bedroom door stood open. She stopped in the doorway. Someone was lying in her bed. The sheets rose and fell with each breath, slow and steady. From where she stood, the figure looked peaceful, familiar. Her own voice whispered from somewhere near the foot of the bed. "You came back." She spun around. The reflection stood in the corner, half in shadow, half in moonlight. Its eyes were closed, but its head moved slightly, tracking her. Sophie's throat tightened. "What do you want from me?" The reflection tilted its head. "Balance." Sophie's grip tightened around her phone, the faint glow shaking. "You can't have my life." The reflection smiled softly. "It was never yours." It stepped closer. Its bare feet made no sound on the floor. "You walked away, Sophie. You left the body behind. You left me behind. I kept walking for you. I kept breathing. But dreams don't last forever." Sophie shook her head violently. "I'm awake. I'm right here." The reflection reached out, fingertips brushing the edge of the bed. The figure lying beneath the sheets stirred slightly, the sound of breath catching. "Then prove it," the reflection whispered. "Lie down." Sophie froze. The reflection's voice softened, almost kind now. "It's the only way to wake up. Someone has to sleep. Someone has to dream." Sophie's hand trembled. "And if I lie down?" The reflection's smile faded. "Then one of us will disappear." The figure on the bed shifted again, turning slightly toward her. The moonlight caught its face, her face. Eyes closed, expression calm. Sophie took a step closer. "If I'm dreaming, I can end this." The reflection nodded slowly. "If you're dreaming." She reached out, fingers brushing the sheet. It was cold, too cold. The reflection's eyes opened, black, endless. "Go on," it whispered. "Come back." Sophie climbed onto the bed slowly, her heart hammering. The air felt heavy, like gravity was bending. The reflection moved closer, standing beside the bed now, staring down at her with an expression she couldn't read: pity or hunger or both. She lay back beside the sleeping version of herself. The sheet shifted, two shapes in perfect symmetry. The reflection leaned down, whispering in her ear, "Close your eyes." Sophie hesitated. "What happens if I do?" The reflection smiled faintly. "You'll see which of us wakes up." The air buzzed, static rising like invisible electricity. Her phone light flickered once, then died completely. The darkness felt thick enough to touch. She reached out and felt her own hand, warm, alive, breathing. Her heartbeat slowed. Her eyelids grew heavy. The reflection's whisper grew softer, fading into the hum of the house. "Come back," it said. "We'll make it one again." Sophie's eyes fluttered closed. The world tilted. A ringing filled her ears, not from the bell by her bed, but from somewhere deeper, inside her skull. Then everything went still. When she opened her eyes again, she was standing at the foot of the bed. Her body lay there, perfectly still. The reflection stood beside her, smiling faintly. "See," it whispered. "You're awake." Sophie looked down at herself, pale, motionless, eyes closed. She reached out, fingers passing through her own arm like smoke. She wasn't breathing anymore. The reflection stepped closer, merging with her shadow. And in that moment, Sophie understood she wasn't the dreamer anymore. She was the dream. At first, Sophie thought she had woken up. The room looked exactly the same bed, same curtains, same faint glow from the streetlight outside. But something felt wrong. The air was too still. The shadows too clean. She sat up slowly, heart pounding. "It worked," she whispered. "I'm awake." But when she looked toward the mirror on the wall, she froze. The woman in the reflection didn't move. For a second, she thought it was just her imagination, that her body was slow to react. But then the reflection blinked, smiled faintly, and turned away. "No," Sophie whispered. "No, no, no." She ran to the mirror, pressing her palms against the glass. The surface was solid, colder than ice. "Hey, stop!" "That's my..." The reflection didn't even glance at her. It moved across the room, stretching its arms, brushing hair out of its face, her face. It picked up her phone, smiled at a notification, and laughed. Sophie's voice cracked. You can't be me." The reflection paused for a moment, then looked straight at her, eyes glinting like glass. "I am you," it whispered. Sophie slammed her fists against the mirror. "Let me out!" The reflection tilted its head, studying her with quiet curiosity. "You wanted to wake up," it said softly. "Now you are." Sophie's breath caught. "This isn't real." The reflection smiled faintly. "That's what you always said about me." The light in the room outside shifted, dawn approaching. Sophie's reflection stretched, yawned, and walked toward the door. The sound of her footsteps faded. She was gone. Sophie pressed her forehead against the cold glass. "Please," she whispered. "Don't leave me here." But the room around her didn't change. The light never grew brighter. The air never moved. She turned around and realized behind the glass there was no window. No sound, only the faint echo of her own breathing. She tried to scream, but it came out muffled, as if the mirror itself swallowed her voice. Time didn't pass the same way in here. Minutes felt like hours, hours like days. Sometimes she could see her reflection self return, brushing teeth, changing clothes, taking calls, living her life like nothing had happened. But every so often, the reflection would pause in front of the mirror, look directly at her, and whisper through the glass, "Don't you dare close your eyes." Sophie would whisper back, "Why?" The reflection would smile, "Because if you fall asleep again, I'll forget you were ever real." The thought gnawed at her. Every time the reflection left the room, Sophie tried to find a way out, pressing, scratching, screaming. But the glass never cracked. It flexed faintly, like a living thing that enjoyed her struggle. Days blurred together. She began to notice other reflections, faint outlines moving behind the walls of the mirror world. People she didn't know, some crying, some staring blankly. One woman whispered, "Don't look too long. If you see them all, you'll become one of them." Sophie backed away. "Who are you?" The woman smiled sadly. "Sleepwalkers. The ones who never woke up." The world outside continued to shift seasons, light, movement. Sophie's reflection lived her life perfectly, like nothing was missing. She went to work, met friends, even smiled in photos. But sometimes, late at night, the reflection would pause in front of the mirror, stare at her and whisper, "You look tired." Sophie would whisper back, "I'm not tired. I just want out." The reflection's smile would fade. "You wanted the truth. This is it." Then she'd reach out and press her hand against the glass from the other side. Sophie pressed back. For a split second, she felt warmth. A pulse, her pulse. Then it was gone. The reflection turned off the lights and walked away. Darkness swallowed the mirror world again. For the first time, Sophie realized the truth. The mirror wasn't a window. It was a door. A door that only opened one way, and she was on the wrong side of it. Time didn't exist in the mirror world, not the way it did before. There was no sun, no clocks, only the dim, silvery light that came from nowhere and went nowhere. Sometimes Sophie thought she could still hear her heartbeat, but when she pressed her hand to her chest, it was silent. It wasn't that she couldn't die. It was that death didn't mean anything here. At first she screamed until her throat gave out. Then she whispered. Then she stopped talking altogether. The silence around her grew thick, almost companionable. That was when she started noticing the others. They weren't always visible, sometimes just a flicker of movement in the far edges of the glass. Sometimes a whisper that wasn't hers. A shape leaning closer when she wasn't looking. She learned to count them by their reflections. There was a man who sat endlessly in what looked like a dining room, his reflection moving knives and forks that weren't really there. A girl who stared out of a window that didn't open. An old woman who sang to her own reflection, rocking back and forth, whispering, "We all left our beds. Now the beds keep our names." Sophie couldn't stop watching them. Each of them seemed connected to someone on the other side, a reflection living their life, a replacement. And slowly the truth settled over her like dust. This place wasn't hell or purgatory. It was storage. The world kept its balance by filling the gaps. Every dreamer who wandered too far left something behind, and the world made a copy to replace them. That's what she had done. She hadn't been stolen. She had been replaced. The realization was sharp enough to feel like pain. For the first time in what might have been days or centuries, she felt purpose again. If the door had opened one way, it could open again. Maybe she couldn't wake up in her body, but she could find another door, another dream. Someone else's dream. She waited for the next shift, that faint ripple in the glass when someone on the outside stared too long at their reflection. She could feel it like wind brushing against skin that wasn't there. That's how new doors opened. The first time, it was a boy brushing his teeth in a dim bathroom. He leaned close to the mirror, eyes half shut from sleep. Sophie pressed her hand against the glass, whispering, "Can you hear me?" The boy blinked, confused. He leaned closer. For a second, their eyes met hers inside the glass, his outside. She felt warmth again. A heartbeat, a spark. Then he blinked, shook his head, and turned away. The door closed. The next time, it was a woman applying lipstick, humming to herself. Sophie whispered again, louder this time. "Please, look at me." "Just look at me." The woman froze. The lipstick fell from her hand. Their eyes met. Sophie pressed her hand harder against the glass. The reflection rippled faintly, the surface bending like water. "Yes," Sophie whispered, "open it." "Let me in." The woman's eyes widened. "Who are you?" Sophie smiled faintly. "The same as you, just sleeping." The woman backed away, terrified, shaking her head. "No, no, no, no." The mirror cracked. Sophie screamed. Not in pain and hope. Cracks meant weakness. Cracks meant exits. She slammed her palms against the glass again and again. "Let me out!" The reflection of the woman disappeared. The crack sealed. The surface smoothed over. Silence. Sophie fell to her knees, shaking. "Please," she whispered. "Someone, anyone." Then she felt it. A pulse in the air. A shimmer that wasn't light. Somewhere nearby, another mirror had opened. Another dream, she ran. The space around her wasn't made of walls, but of layers, thousands of mirrors stacked in impossible angles, reflecting each other forever. She moved through them like water, passing reflections of strangers, of herself, of things that weren't human at all. Finally, she stopped in front of one. The glass shimmered faintly, showing a small bedroom, a girl asleep under a blanket, breathing slow and steady. Sophie pressed her hand against it. The surface felt thin. The girl stirred, frowning in her sleep. Sophie whispered, "It's okay. I'll keep you safe." Her hand began to sink into the glass, the surface rippling around her fingers. Then faintly, a voice behind her said, "Don't do it." She turned. The old woman, the one who sang to her reflection, stood there, eyes cloudy but kind. If you take her place, she'll take yours. The door only knows one rule. Someone has to dream. Sophie hesitated, heart pounding. I can't stay here, the woman smiled sadly. None of us can. That's why we keep trying. Sophie turned back toward the mirror. The girl's breathing slowed. The world beyond the glass shimmered, pulling at her like a tide. She pressed her forehead to the surface. I'm sorry, she whispered. I just want to go home. And then she stepped through. The glass folded around her like water. The mirror rippled once, then stilled. Inside the girl's room, everything was quiet. The girl's eyes fluttered open for a moment, then closed again. Outside, in the mirror, Sophie's reflection was gone. But faintly, in the distance of the reflection world, another mirror began to glow. Someone else was waking up. For a moment, Sophie thought she'd done it, that she was free. The world around her was warm again. She could feel air moving, could hear the low hum of a ceiling fan. The faint smell of lavender drifted from somewhere close. She stood barefoot on soft carpet, blinking at the sunlight filtering through curtains. The room was small, cozy, alive. She touched the dresser. It was solid, warm. Her reflection in the mirror looked normal. Her pulse returned, faint but real. She exhaled shakily. I made it, a voice answered. Did you? Sophie froze. On the bed sat a woman, young, pale, wearing a faded blue nightgown. Her hair fell over her face like a curtain. She sat perfectly still, hands resting on her knees, staring at the floor. Sophie took a step closer. Who are you? The woman lifted her head slowly. Her eyes were gray, wide, and strangely calm. I've been waiting for you. Sophie's stomach twisted. You can see me? The woman smiled faintly. Of course. I saw you watching me in the mirror. Sophie's voice trembled. You saw me? The woman nodded. Everyone does eventually. You're not the first to try. Sophie stepped back, shaking her head. No, I came here to wake up. I'm not like you. The woman tilted her head. That's what I said. Something in her voice made Sophie's skin crawl, not the words, but the rhythm, the tone. It was her own voice, softer, slower, like hearing herself through a dream. Sophie's pulse quickened. What is this place? The woman smiled faintly. A dream. Yours, mine. It doesn't matter. They all overlap. Sophie turned toward the mirror, the same mirror she'd come through. But now it was blank. No reflection. Just a soft shimmer, like fog on glass. The woman's voice lowered. Once you step through, you can't go back. You only move forward into someone else's dream. Sophie turned sharply. Then whose dream is this? The woman looked at her, and the faint smile vanished. Yours, Sophie blinked. No, I told you. The woman stood slowly. Her movements were too precise, too synchronized. You're dreaming again, Sophie. You never stopped. Sophie backed away, shaking her head. That's not possible. The woman took another step. The floor creaked beneath her bare feet. You keep trying to wake up, but all you ever do is move sideways. Into someone else's dream, into mine, into yours. Sophie's breath came faster. Stop talking like that. The woman tilted her head, eyes glinting faintly. How many times do you think you've done this? What? The woman took another step closer, until they were inches apart. How many times have you thought you escaped? How many mirrors have you walked through? How many beds have you left behind? Sophie's chest tightened. You're lying. The woman smiled, and in that moment, Sophie saw her face change, flickering through dozens of versions of herself. Each one with slightly different eyes, different hair, different age. 1,000 Sophies overlapping like a broken film reel. The voices of all of them whispered at once, You are the dream now. Sophie screamed, stumbling backward, knocking over a lamp. The light flickered, then dimmed to nothing. The room shifted, stretching at the corners like a reflection bending in water. The woman's face stilled again, returning to one version calm, quiet, pitying. You should rest, she said softly. That's what you were made for. Sophie shook her head violently. No, I'm done sleeping. The woman's smile faded. You say that every time. The window behind her cracked like ice. Light leaked through, white and blinding. The air vibrated, humming with invisible static. Sophie covered her ears. Stop it, the woman, her twin, whispered one last time. When you wake up again, you won't remember this. You'll think it's real. You'll think you're free. The light exploded. When Sophie opened her eyes, she was standing in a different room. Different walls. Different smell. Same mirror. A small boy brushed his teeth nearby, humming softly, his reflection blurry in the glass. Sophie felt her chest tighten. No, the boy looked up, pausing. For a brief moment, his reflection turned not toward him, but toward her. And smiling faintly, it whispered in her voice, "Someone has to dream." For a long time, Sophie didn't move. The boy's reflection faded, replaced by her own again, hollow eyes, pale skin, trembling hands. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, full of meaning she didn't want to face. She understood now. Every dream she had entered wasn't an escape. It was another cage. Every reflection she'd seen wasn't someone else. It was another version of her trying, failing, endlessly looping through the same nightmare of waking up in the wrong world. And the only way to end it was to stop existing in all of them. She turned slowly toward the mirror, tracing her fingers along its edges. It pulsed faintly like a living thing. The cracks glowed faintly blue, light seeping through as though something behind it was breathing. Sophie whispered, "I know what you are now." Her reflection blinked back, expression blank. "You're not a window. You're a vein. You connect everything. Every dreamer, every sleepwalker, every me." The reflection smiled faintly, tilting its head. "Then why are you still afraid?" Sophie took a deep breath. "Because I don't know what happens when the mirror breaks." The reflection's smile faded. "No one does." Sophie looked down at her hands, the faint shimmer of transparency already creeping along her fingers, like her body was fading. She wasn't supposed to exist in this place. She was an error, a duplicate left behind too long. The mirror pulsed again. Behind it, faint whispers began to rise, the voices of all the other Sophies. Some pleading, some laughing, some crying. "Don't. Please. It doesn't change anything. Break it." Sophie clenched her fists. "You don't get to decide anymore." She grabbed one of the floating shards from the air. It felt weightless, humming faintly with energy. The reflection's eyes widened. "Sophie, wait!" She raised the shard high. "I'm ending this." And she slammed it into the center of the mirror. The sound wasn't like glass breaking. It was like a scream, deep, endless, stretching across every reflection, every surface, every dream. The light burst outward, flooding everything in white. The reflection shattered like snowflakes in fire, dissolving one by one. Sophie fell to her knees, the world disintegrating around her. She could feel herself fading, not dying, not disappearing, but becoming something thinner. The air grew light, her body weightless. Her reflection knelt in front of her, eyes soft, voice trembling. "You don't have to." "Yes," Sophie whispered. "I do." The reflection reached out. Their fingertips met. For the first time, there was no barrier. No glass, just touch. It was warm. Then everything stopped. The light faded. The sound died. When Sophie opened her eyes, she was standing in a forest. Morning light filtered through the trees, painting everything gold. Birds sang softly in the distance. She looked down, no mirror, no wires, no reflections, just her. For the first time in forever, she couldn't see her reflection anywhere, not in the water, not in the shadows, not even in her eyes when she blinked. And for the first time, she didn't need to. She walked forward, barefoot on the cool grass, the air clean and alive. She didn't know if this was real or another dream, and for once, she didn't care. She whispered softly, almost smiling, "Someone has to wake up." Far away, in a quiet house, a mirror sat cracked in an empty bedroom. The bed was made. The bell on the nightstand was still. And for the first time since anyone could remember, the reflection in the glass was gone. 3 weeks later, in a quiet suburb 2 towns over, a young woman named Emily Rhodes moved into a small rental house. It wasn't anything special, 2 bedrooms, thin walls, a creaky floor. Cheap but cozy. She unpacked boxes alone, humming to herself, happy for a fresh start. The landlord had mentioned one thing when she signed the lease. The last tenant left a mirror behind. "You can keep it if you want or toss it out." Emily hadn't thought much about it. Everyone leaves something behind. By nightfall, she'd set up her bed, plugged in a lamp, and leaned the tall mirror against the wall across from it. The glass was cracked near the top, a thin line splitting the reflection like lightning. She smiled at herself, brushing dust from her hands. Good enough. The house settled around her, wood creaking as the temperature dropped. Outside, the cicadas fell silent. The kind of silence that makes you realize you're the only person awake for miles. She yawned, changed into pajamas, and climbed into bed. The mirror caught the faint glow from her lamp, painting her reflection in soft orange light. She stared at it for a while, not out of vanity, just curiosity. It was strange how the crack seemed to shift when she moved. For a second, she thought she saw it widen. She laughed under her breath. "Get a grip, Em." She reached over, turned off the lamp. Darkness filled the room. The mirror glimmered faintly with leftover light from the window. For a moment, she lay still, listening to her own breathing. Then a soft sound, like a sigh. She sat up. "Hello?" Nothing, just the hum of the refrigerator downstairs. She looked back toward the mirror. Her reflection stared back faint in the darkness, barely visible. She leaned forward slightly, squinting. Something felt wrong. Her reflection's head was tilted just a little more than hers. She tilted her own head left. The reflection tilted right. Her heart skipped. "No." She blinked, and for a split second, the reflection didn't blink back. Her pulse started pounding in her ears. She fumbled for the lamp switch. The bulb flickered on. The reflection smiled. Emily froze. The smile wasn't hers. She stared, too afraid to move, too afraid to breathe. Her reflection raised a hand, slow, deliberate, and pressed its palm flat against the inside of the glass. Behind it, the crack pulsed faintly, glowing soft blue. Emily whispered, "What are you?" The reflection's lips moved soundlessly, forming words she couldn't hear. Then came the faintest whisper from somewhere deep in the room. "Someone has to dream." The lamp flickered, then died. The room went black. Emily's scream caught in her throat, not because she couldn't scream, but because in that darkness she saw something worse. Her reflection was still glowing. But it wasn't sitting up anymore. It was standing, right beside the bed. Emily didn't scream. The sound gathered in her throat and turned to ice. The reflection stood right beside the bed, glowing softly in the dead bulb's afterimage, as if the glass had kept a memory of light for itself. Its face was hers, but rested in an expression she didn't own, calm, patient, like someone who has already waited longer than midnight. The crack at the crown of the mirror pulsed once, a dull blue vein. Emily groped for the lamp again, found only cold brass and a frayed cord, then pushed herself backward across the mattress until her shoulders struck the headboard. The reflection didn't move. It simply angled its head and watched her breathing. "Please," Emily whispered to the dark. "Please stop." Nothing changed. The house was a listening shell. Water clicked somewhere in the pipes, then held its breath. Her mind tried to rearrange the facts into something that made sense. She was overtired, first-night nerves, old glass distorting shapes. But the reflection lifted its hand and laid its palm against the inside of the crack. Emily's chest squeezed. She grabbed the spare throw blanket at her feet and flung it over the mirror. The fabric slid down, caught at the frame, and hung there like a shroud. For half a second, the room exhaled. Then the blanket bulged from the inside, a slow, rounded pressure like someone leaning forward beneath it. Emily scrambled off the bed, toes striking the rug, and back toward the doorway. The hallway beyond was a narrow throat of shadow. She told herself to keep moving, to get her phone, to turn on anything that made noise and light. Her fingers found the switch plate. The hall light came alive in a faint, sickly amber. A shoebox she didn't remember stacking there rested by the staircase. On its dusty lid, 4 damp footprints faced her bare, slightly splayed, too large to be a child's, too light to be a man's. Her size, her arch. She stumbled into the living room and yanked the TV on. Static rolled across the screen, then a sliver of a home menu flickered and stuck. Her phone lay on the coffee table. She opened the camera app with shaking hands and zoomed back toward the bedroom doorway. The blanket still hung over the mirror. The fabric trembled, then went still. Her phone timestamp read 11:03 p.m. She flicked the clock app and saw the same minute locked like a lid. She swallowed hard and started recording. In the screen's frame, something else moved, at first just a wrong shadow, then a shape sliding along the far wall, where the hallway met the kitchen. Emily swung the phone. The hall showed nothing but the long, polite rectangle of light cast by the ceiling fixture, but in the phone's live view, a woman stood there at the seam of brightness and dark. Emily's breath stalled. The figure was thin, hair loose, eyes open too wide. For a second, the picture buckled. Pixels swam. The face smoothed into a bright mask and then reassembled. "Who are you?" Emily whispered. The TV hissed. The figure lifted one hand and, palm down, made a small downward motion. "Lie down." The same gesture a parent makes to a child who rose too early. "No," Emily said, louder now, the word catching. "No, this is my house." The figure's mouth shaped words without sound. Emily turned the phone volume up. Nothing. She raised the TV's speaker, and the hiss thickened into a tide. Beneath it, like a thin note rising through foam, came 6 syllables from everywhere and nowhere. "Come back to bed." Emily's scalp prickled. A ring of cold tightened at the base of her skull. She stood there for a long moment, heart jackknifing, trying to decide if obedience was safer than defiance. The bell trick. She remembered a story, a video, a friend's warning tie, a bell to the wrist and the bedpost. "Wake yourself if you wander." She grabbed kitchen twine and a brass napkin ring and looped them clumsily, not scraping her skin. She returned to the bedroom doorway. The blanket was quiet again. She pulled it back an inch. The mirror showed the foot of the bed empty, the room behind her small and broken into pale pieces. Her reflection didn't appear. Emily stepped closer. The crack glowed again, that dull blue vein. She reached out with one fingertip, the same idiot curiosity that makes you test a tooth you know is loose. The glass felt colder than ice, colder than metal, colder than anything she'd touched in winter. Under her skin, a tremor traveled up her forearm, fizzing through the nerves. "Just a surface," she murmured, eyes watering. "Just a surface." Then the glass softened. Not melted, softened like skin. The crack widened under her finger, and a second hand, paler than light and the same size as hers, pressed up from within and matched her touch exactly. The bell line at her wrist trembled. The napkin ring chimed once, small and perfect. And though her arm hadn't moved, the bell rang again, a clean, bright sound that came from above the bed, the exact place where a sleeper's hand would rise in the dark. Emily inhaled until it hurt. "No," she said to the bell, to the hand, to the house. "No." The hand inside the glass curved its fingers to lace with hers. The blanket slipped the rest of the way off, pooling at the mirror's feet. On the other side of the glass, faint as breath on a black window, words formed and faded and formed again, written backward. "Someone has to dream." Emily yanked her hand back. The mirror's surface snapped firm again. Her bell shivered once, twice, and fell quiet. The room's silence felt newly shaped, as if something had just finished making a decision. Emily climbed onto the bed, dragging the quilt up to her collarbone with a mechanical neatness, and lay perfectly flat. The line from wrist to bedpost held. She fixed her eyes on a single crack in the plaster above and tried to breathe on purpose. Slow in, slow out. On the other side of the room, the mirror brightened soft blue, not threatening, just a moon behind clouds. The reflection stepped out of the glowing into ordinary dark and stood at the foot of the bed. Emily could feel it without looking, a shift in gravity, a small new valley in the room's pressure. The figure didn't touch her. It only matched her breathing, note for note. After a while, the bell line sagged a fraction, as if her arm had grown heavier by the weight of one more sleep. And there, somewhere between a numbered breath and the next, the house exhaled. The crack dimmed. The TV's static thinned to a quiet like cold wind in a keyhole. Emily's eyes stung and watered. She didn't blink. The reflection lifted its hand again and made the smallest gesture in the world. Down. Emily shut her eyes. Pre-dawn blue thinned the corners of the room until the furniture looked like cutouts. Emily counted heartbeats, but the count kept slipping. Numbers slid off one another as if they were wet. The bell at her wrist hung quiet, a small round promise. She tried to sleep toward safety, not toward surrender, and learned the difference is a thread. The reflection didn't move. It existed. That was all. Existing was enough to tilt the room's center an inch to the left. Stay awake by staying still, she told herself in a whisper she did not let out. The weirdness of that instruction, the way it looped, nearly made her laugh. She swallowed the sound. A laugh would crack. Anything cracked would open. At some lost minute, the napkin ring chimed without moving. The sound didn't carry through air. It arrived. The mirror brightened to the exact hue of a winter dawn you can see without a window. Under the covers, something in the mattress remembered another body. The dip next to her deepened, gentle like a person sitting down without putting weight on springs. Emily kept breathing in borrowed time, On the far wall, a picture frame she'd hung crooked when she moved in leveled itself by the width of a fingernail. A draft touched her ankle. The quilt tucked under her shoulder by an inch, not pulled, just corrected. A second, perfect breath began across the room, a metronome set to her pulse. The bell line slackened again, but her wrist did not lift. In the mirror, a ghost of a room where nothing lived and everything watched waited to trade places. Emily thought of closing her eyes harder, as if sealing them would matter. She did not. The TV in the other room woke from nothing to the shape of a screensaver and went back to nothing, as if it had moved through a channel that only houses get. The crack in the mirror brightened and dimmed and brightened on a rhythm that didn't belong to electricity. Words wanted to form there. They didn't. Sometimes refusal is a language. A small thing saved her that she hadn't meant to save. The knot she'd tied was messy. A tuft of twine pricked her wrist, the rasp of plant fiber on skin, raw and exact and ordinary. She held on to the sting the way people hold the edge of a table during a storm. This hurts, she thought, and it anchored her to a place that had clocks and knives and grocery lists. The mattress beside her changed its mind. It rose a fraction as if the seated weight had stood up. Across the room, a shape that matched her height and wrongness grew finer at the edges, like frost clearing. It turned toward the window that was still night and listened for a sound that would tell it what to be. Emily inhaled and held and let go. The bell trembled. Not a ring, only the silence that follows a note keeping its shape. Then the reflection did something new. It stepped to the mirror and faced it, not to enter, to listen. The glass answered with a tiny squeal of temperature, the cry windows make when the season turns. In that hinge sound, Emily understood the rule wasn't mystical, only cruelly simple. The bed must not be empty. The house must not be without a dreamer. The mirror must not be without a face. I can be all three, she thought. And the thought felt like stealing fire. She slid her palm an inch along the sheet until her fingertips touched wood where the quilt had slipped from the headboard. She pressed there. The small grit of paint and dust pressed back. The reflection cocked its head, either hearing or mistaking a sound for one. It didn't come closer. It didn't need to. The trade had failed. There is a mercy in failure. Light unhooked itself from the wall's corners. Morning began not as a thing you see first, but as a thing that changes how other things look. The crack in the mirror cooled to an ordinary scar. The bell line drew itself taut by the tiny shrink of night air becoming day. Emily's breathing lost its metronome. It remembered how to be messy and human and miscounted. Somewhere a truck downshifted. Someone's sprinkler burped. The world resumed making mistakes. She kept lying there a long time after the room forgave her. When she finally sat up, the bell gave one small, honest tap as the napkin ring slid to her pulse. She untied the knot with numb hands and crossed to the mirror on legs that felt like new foals. Her reflection climbed out of dark like a photograph in a tray. It was late. It was exactly on time. It wore her fatigue and her small stubbornness like a coat someone else had tried on and given back. The crack did not glow. The words did not appear. Only breath ghosted the glass where she stood too close. She wiped it with a sleeve that smelled like boxes and detergent. The reflection wiped too. There was a log of human lag, not a haunted one. The room around her was just a room again, and that ordinariness hurt, which meant it held, on the doormat downstairs. Damp had lifted the old letters into a faint, bruised memory. You're still asleep. She knelt and flipped the mat over. Plain rubber face-up. A small and silly victory. She took a pen and a tape square and wrote a new rule on the underside where only she would ever see it. Stay in bed if you're a ghost. It was a joke. It wasn't. She put the mat back down and locked the door and turned the deadbolt twice. The sound was delicious. Back in the bedroom, she angled the mirror so it caught the window and the sky beyond. She opened the curtains, erasing the room's last deliberate shadow. She made the bed with an attention that felt like prayer. Pillow sharp, corners tight. The place where a body goes kept. If the house wanted a dreamer, it could take the sun-warmed imprint of a quilt. When she finally lay down, not to surrender, but to rest, the ceiling crack was still there, exactly itself. She watched it until it became boring. Boredom is its own kind of spell. The bell sat on the nightstand, looped in a neat circle, quiet because it had earned quiet. The mirror showed a room where a woman was not being stolen, and a morning that would get brighter if nobody touched it. She slept. She returned. She did both. Across the glass, far away where reflections pile up into weather, something watched her and decided not to try. Not today. The clock on her phone advanced from 11:03 to 11:04 and kept going, an ordinary miracle performing itself without applause. The house inhaled. The house exhaled, and for now, the bed was full.